All right, Rachel. Thanks so much for doing this. Tell me, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started, as a speaker, as a motivational speaker, things like that.
Yeah, my name is Rachel Druckenmiller. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I spent the first 13 years of my career working in corporate in the insurance industry as the director of well-being and employee engagement. And I helped organizations and their leaders and their teams to build cultures that people, were supported in terms of their health and well-being, where we focused on what we could do to make work a better place for people to be. And in that job, I started getting invited to speak at different events. And a lot of them were, maybe some for clients, some were more local. And I started saying yes very early on in my career, maybe in my mid 20s, early to mid 20s. And I said yes, and I said yes, and I spoke more and more. And I realized how much I liked it each time I had the opportunity to speak and how fun it was to build presentations and tell stories and gather data and interact with people. And I had my first national keynote in 2016, keynote at a national conference. And then in 2019, I realized that's what I wanted to do full time. And well, I realized it sooner, but I made the decision to leave my corporate job in 2019 after I went through a 6-month professional speaker training that gave me the confidence to realize I could do this as a job. So I'm 6 years in, almost 6 years of doing this full time.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So what goes into these sorts of motivational speeches or like these kind of conferences that you do in front of these people? Because I saw like a video where you g gave this motivational speech and it was awesome.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I describe myself as motivation with substance because sometimes, there's a lot of people that might be identified as motivational speakers that say a lot of, I don't know, say things that people are temporarily inspired by, but don't actually change anything because they heard it. And so my goal is always, through the power of combining storytelling. So every keynote I do, combine stories from my own life, from other people's lives, from people I interview that are going to be in the room, because everybody connects to story regardless of who they are. And then I weave in opportunities for interaction because if people are at an event together, they want to get to know people. They want to network. They want to feel seen. They want to feel energized. And the way that they do that is not by listening to somebody talk at them for an hour. It's by having opportunities to have meaningful moments of interaction with people that are near them. And then I weave in, certain kind of power statements that are intended to be really sticky that I hope people will remember. And then I also give them practical, actionable tools to implement the things I'm talking about. So it doesn't just feel like, oh, that was really inspiring. Now what? I like to say I give people the now what that turns that inspiration into something that's actionable.
Mm-hmm. What are some of those topics that you mention in each of those motivational speeches that you give?
Well, the main one I talk about is helping people to unmute themselves. So a lot of people silence, shrink, and sabotage themselves for any number of reasons, usually because of some fear of failure or judgment or rejection, of not being good enough, of looking stupid, of being wrong, of rocking the boat, of causing conflict, of disappointing somebody. We have all these reasons why we keep ourselves small and muted, and it affects our ability to contribute. It affects our ability to feel fulfilled. It affects our ability to really genuinely connect with other people. And so the thing I'm most passionate about speaking about is helping people to what I refer to as unmuting themselves and getting clear on what their strengths are, understanding how to advocate for themselves, seeing themselves the way the people who see the best in them see them, and then being the nudge that encourages them to say yes to the opportunities that come up, even if they think they're not ready. So there's a bunch of topics I speak about. That's one of the main ones. I'm happy to talk about any of the other ones as well.
Sure.
So another one I talk about is what matters most now. And it's a framework about navigating change. So everybody, imagine you included, we've had all these moments where things are uncertain and we're going through change and we don't like it and it's frustrating. And the thing I like to remind people is you can't control what's happening around you necessarily, but you can control your attitude and your actions. You can always control those two things. So, what your response to it is, and the action that you take as a result of what's happening. So, I take them through a process of reflecting, reframing, and recalibrating. Reflecting might be taking a moment to get rooted in and why and who they're helping and why it matters. Because when things are changing, we can lose sight of something like a purpose, basically a purpose question. And then reframing is helping them shift their perspective on what they're going through to see it through a more optimistic lens. And then the recalibration is how can they take ownership of how they're showing up? And a lot of that's rooted in character. So it's regardless of what's happening around you, you could decide, I'm going to still choose to be kind. I'm going to still choose to be honest. I'm going to still choose to be grateful. I'm going to still choose to be perseverant. And so taking ownership of the kind of person that we want to be, regardless of what's happening around us. And so I guide people through a process for how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I like that. It's really important, and it's really, you know, it's, just keep going forward in the face of whatever's going on. And if people don't like it, just whatever,
Well, we all go through hard things. I mean, the thing I've learned is that everybody goes through hard things that, but some people just don't talk about it. So
Right.
I've never met a person who said, you know what, I've coasted my way all the way through my life and I've never dealt with something difficult. I've never, unless they're lying. I mean, there's nobody I've ever met that's made it to adulthood that didn't face some form of adversity. So it's relatable to talk about things and say, look, you're going to face difficult things. You're going to face uncertainty. You're going to go through change you don't like,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to choose what you make of it. So in the midst of all this, after a year, after not even a year, uh, 9 months after I left my job, I was out running with my husband and got hit by a pickup truck
Mm.
and fractured my back. 6 weeks into the pandemic, 85% of my business, when the pandemic hit, my only source of income was in-person speaking engagements. Whoops. I didn't really think that through. And so I had to pivot because 85% of my business disappeared. Like people just canceled all their events and they didn't pivot to only maybe 15% of them switched them to virtual. And so
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn how to upscale my or up level my skills in virtual facilitation and getting all this equipment and learning how to use everything. And I made a choice. You know, I could have had that experience happen and I could have just kind of put my hands up and been like, well, nothing I can do. It is what it is, but I made the choice. I said, well, you know what? Everyone's struggling with right now, feeling like they got hit by a truck, metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
I can
Yeah,
relate,
that
you know?
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Um, like I know that you said that in addition to giving speeches, you also talk to people. What are the conversations like that you have between, members that go to your events?
Mm. A lot of times people come up to me and they say, like after a keynote, I mean, I have one, I've had three in February across different states in the US. And often people come up to me afterwards. Sometimes they have tears in their eyes and they'll just hug me and they'll say, I really needed to hear that today. Because well, a lot of times you hear people speak on stage and they're not being as honest as they could be. The question I've been asking myself before I get up to speak is how can I be more honest? How can I be even more honest? How can I be even more honest about how I open up about the thoughts and experiences around this topic so that people can feel more connected in a deeper way? And so when people come up to me and say, I really needed to hear that today. There was a woman that reached out after one event and said she had to give a presentation the next day to the same group that I was speaking to. And she said, usually when I finish a presentation, I feel relieved, but this is the first time I felt excited. And so I've had people leave. I mean, at least 3 HR, human resources leaders have reached out to me in the past year and a half to tell me that after my talks, I've given them the courage and I've given them language for how to ask for a raise. And they've advocated for themselves and they've, in some cases made thousands of more dollars a year because they did, what I advise them to do. And, or sometimes people just say, I so needed to hear this today. You have no idea. And they won't explain it, but I'll see the tears in their eyes and I'll know that something I said really struck a chord with them. And it gave them permission to feel something they have maybe been avoiding. Um, People book vacations. People follow up with me. They say, because of your session, I like booked 2 vacations because I realized how burned out I was. And so it's these, it's or they ask for a change in their job because they realize they're on the brink of burnout and they can't keep going at this pace. So they take action. That's the thing I love about what I get to do is people they take action when they leave, and personally and professionally. And I that's really why I do what I do.
Yeah. You mentioned like one point earlier that that often, gets missed, where like speakers when they give speeches, that oftentimes people don't feel that authenticity, that realness. So how do you sort of do that in your keynotes?
That's a great question. You know, a lot of it is I am so committed to my own growth. I always am working with a coach of some kind. I see a therapist regularly, so I've been seeing a therapist for almost, geez, 4.5 years, almost every Saturday. I I'm constantly looking at what I do and asking myself, how can I make it better? How can I make it better? How can I be more honest? How can I take this experience and improve it by 10%? And I'm doing that every time I get off stage. So that my goal is that, 5 years from now, I don't even recognize the version of me that was on stage because I've been willing to do so much work to, again, get the coaching, to seek feedback, to lean into what's really working, to be braver. I take risks on stage that a lot of people wouldn't take. So I'm a singer and I've sung in keynotes, I've probably dozens of times at this point, but I never opened a speech with a song. And my coach said, her name's Vika. She said, Rachel, have you ever thought about opening a keynote with a song? Like you'll really stand out. No one's doing that. And I said, well, I thought about it, but it feels really, I mean, a cappella. I mean, this is very vulnerable to do this, right? There's high risk, high reward, but man, if you mess that up, that's your opener. And that doesn't feel good if that's a big risk. And she said, well, if you do it, it'll give you immediate credibility with people because for people to see you, that's a brave thing to do, to sing a cappella on the stage in front of people before you even say a word. And so I did it and it went really well. And then I ended the speech by finishing the song that I started at the intro. And I'm going to be doing the same thing at the keynote that I have next week. And so I'm willing to take risks. I'm willing to involve the audience. So there's different tools you can use to get audience engagement and participation. And since my message is about unmuting yourself, I want to make sure as many people in that room feel heard as they possibly can. And so I give them opportunities to share their voice during the session. And because of that, I'm able to kind of improvise in the talk. And it's not like I sort of put the speech in their hands a little bit, which is risky. Some speakers are like, I would never do that. I do
Hmm.
not trust an audience. I'm not doing it. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, I trust myself to handle whatever the audience gives me.
Right.
So a lot of it's about trusting yourself to be able to navigate that and being willing to take risks, being willing to do the work yourself, working with coaches and therapists or some other type of mentors or guides. Be willing to look at yourself in the mirror and be honest about what's there, be willing to grow, and then be willing to talk about all of that on stage. And that's what I think makes me authentic because I'm constantly doing the work. I'm never phoning it in. I've never delivered the same keynote exactly the same way twice.
Yeah, it's nice to go off script
Yeah.
sometimes because it shows the real sort of the realness of a person. Because if you go on script, there's not it doesn't resonate.
Yeah. People can feel it. And when you're so scripted and I've done that. I've been scripted before, and it doesn't feel good to me. And I can pendulum swing when I go so far to I haven't really scripted much of anything and I'm not winging it because I know what's coming, but I haven't really planned the specificity of what I want to say. And to me, words matter. So there's certain things I want to say a particular way, and I want to make sure that I say it that way every time. But there's other things that if you're so tightly scripted, a coach I had once, Michael Port said, plan tight so you can hang loose. So have a plan for what's going to happen so that when you get in these moments where you feel like you want to go in a little different direction than what you planned because of either the energy of the room or something somebody said or something that happened, you have the freedom to know where you're ultimately going. Because you know where you're ultimately going, you have that clarity. You have the freedom to, in that moment, kind of improvise a bit and allow new insights to emerge. And those are often the most powerful moments on stage because you as a speaker didn't see it coming and the audience feels how genuine it is that is clearly emerging in that moment and it wasn't scripted.
Hmm. My next question is, what have you learned in doing these kind of motivational speeches, and what do you still hope to learn in terms of something new? So it's a two-parter.
Mm. I would say what I've learned, gosh, I've learned that something I learned recently from same coach, as I said to her, that I've been showing up as my openings of my keynotes with this heaviness. Certain stories that I've consistently told at the beginning. For instance, like when I burned out, and my opening would be, I'm lying on the couch, tears streaming down my face. I'm sicker than I've ever been. You know, my husband is sending me pictures from my niece's birthday party, and I'm missing it, and all that. And I, get into this spot where I'm kind of bringing the audience down right away. Or it's May 3rd of 2020. I'm out on a run with my husband. I didn't see it coming when a pickup truck took a right turn at a red light. And I said to her, I said, I feel like that's just so heavy. Sometimes I'm the opening keynote of the whole day, and I don't want to suck people into this vortex of feeling like I got punched in the face. And she said, the way we show up on stage is a reflection of the way we feel inside. So for me, if I want to show up on stage from a place of levity and a place of vulnerability and a place of really being genuinely present for the room and not stuck in my head, I have to do the work to get myself to that point. Whether that's certain practices before I go on stage, whether it's how I'm preparing, how I'm rehearsing. I've got to really kind of dial in. We have to be, as speakers, responsible for how we are feeling before we get on stage and be in touch with that. Because whatever we're dealing with inside is going to come out in some form on stage. And so we have to be aware of what that is. Because we have a responsibility. When you're on a stage and you're in front of, hundreds or thousands of people, you have a responsibility to take care of those people,
Hmm.
And so, I mean, that's how I want to make sure I'm answering the question. If you could maybe repeat it again, I feel like I was going off a little there.
Which question?
Maybe the second part. Did I answer the first part?
Yeah, you did. You did. The second part was, what do you learn in terms of something new?
Something new. I would say what I learned in terms of something new is the importance of leaning into your natural state. So for me, for people that know me really well, I'm a pretty witty, sassy person. And I make side comments about stuff that people laugh at. And I like making people laugh. And instead of having maybe 2 or 3 moments where I know people are going to laugh during a speech, I'm going back and I'm listening to recordings of past speeches and I am making notes in a notebook of the minute markers. Where do people laugh? Was it a really loud laugh, or was it kind of like a sort of a complimentary, you know what I mean? Just like
Hmm.
that was funny. Or it was like a real serious, everyone was committed to laughing at that. And then I think about, okay, how, in those moments where people are already really with me, because even laughter, humor is a form of vulnerability. If you think about it, a comedian says something, says a line, and nobody laughs. Whew, that's as vulnerable as sharing something really uncomfortable about yourself in a more vulnerable way of, a difficult thing you went through that you haven't openly shared before. To be funny, to try to be funny is a form of vulnerability because you're sort of offering something to people and they might not receive it at all. So for me, it's leaning more into my natural state is to be a bit more playful and to not be so serious. My natural when I'm in my most playful state, when I'm in my body, not in my head, that is how I show up. So for me, I'm learning the importance of leaning into my sense of humor And not to try to be a comedian, but I mean, I'm telling you, every 3 to 5 minutes, I want them to be laughing at something I say.
Hmm.
That's been a little bit of a shift too, of how can I punch this? They call it punching it up. How can I punch up that speech a little bit more? Have it be totally me, authentic to me, not me trying to use somebody else's form of humor. How can I show up fully in that moment with what I think is funny that's going to resonate with people?
Yeah, yeah. Like unfiltered, no script. Yeah.
And even some moments are scripted, like there's a certain moment where I talk about how if I'm talking to a women's conference, I'll talk about how it's really hard for us to let ourselves be seen, to receive compliments from people because we're told from the time we're young, don't toot your own horn. It's very selfish to talk about what you do well. And I give an example of, this is even for the most basic things, it's hard for us to receive a compliment. So women will do this thing where if someone says, "Oh my gosh, I love your dress," instead of saying thank you, which would be the normal response, we do this really weird thing where we'll go, "Look, it has pockets." And we won't even say thank you. And we'll do this weird thing, or somebody will say, "Oh, I love your earrings." And instead of saying thank you, we'll say, "Oh, they were $7 on Amazon." And immediately just bat the compliment away and tell them a piece of information that they don't necessarily need to know. And it's like, just take it in. Say, "Thank you. I really love these earrings too."
Yeah.
Allow that moment to or if somebody says, "Hey, you did an amazing job on that project or in that meeting," instead of saying, "Oh, it was nothing," when it was not nothing, you worked really hard. Take a moment to acknowledge and say, "Thank you. That really means a lot to me. I worked really hard on that meeting and I'm so glad that you could see that effort."
Hmm.
That's not being arrogant. That's
No.
taking a moment to acknowledge your effort.
Right. Yeah. My last question in all this is what sorts of tips, advice would you give to other speakers who want to do what you're doing? Like, have sort of this opportunity where they can be, unfiltered and sort of connect with people in a unique way.
Well, there's a technique or the process I've learned from a group that a speaker community I'm a part of called Impact 11. And they teach this process of the PCT. P is the problem that you're solving. You have to be, if you're going to get on stage, you have to have, there has to be a problem that people care about that you are solving. So for me, it's often disengagement, low performance, disconnection, low morale. Those kind of things are the stuff that a lack of confidence that I'm speaking to in my talks, right? That's kind of the problem that I'm solving for. Burnout, disconnection, disengagement. What is your credibility? The C is credibility. What is your credibility to solve that problem? So I could say, well, for 13 years, I worked in corporate and I helped organizations and our employer get recognized as a healthy employer, healthy workplace, best place to work. I was recognized, I got different awards and recognition for my thought leadership in the industry, in HR and well-being. And then the transformation, what's the transformation you promise on the other side of what you're doing? And the transformation I promise is some of the things we talked about earlier, is that as a result of being in the room with me, people will walk away with an elevated sense of their own capability. They will feel more confident. They will feel more inclined to contribute in meaningful ways so they have greater impact and influence at work. They will take more ownership of their career. They'll advocate for themselves and what they need. They'll become a better, more effective employee. And so for me, that's that's kind of the process I go through of the problem I'm solving, the credibility I have to solve it, and the transformation that I provide on the other side of it. So it's not just about, when you want to speak, it's not just about, "Oh, I have a really great story." Okay, there's a lot of people that have really great stories. But how do you make the insights gained from whatever you have gone through or experienced, how do you make them relevant to people in a way that matters to them? And what can you promise is going to happen on the other side of somebody being in a room when you're on stage? And so it's important to have clarity around things like that. So part of it is, one, being willing to you have to get reps in. I mean, I've spoken on stages of varying sizes, some not on stages at all, some on a Thursday morning in a hotel conference room to 25 people where I got paid $0 to talk. This was when I started speaking, a decade, 10, 12 years ago, and see that as a rep of, oh, I'm going to practice my content. I'm going to notice what works. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to always ask for feedback afterwards of finding out what was resonated with people most. Is there anything I could have done better or differently? And constantly honing that in, watching speakers that I really admire, people who are the kind of speaker that I want to be. There were certain people like that starting out that when I first started speaking, I thought that's the kind of speaker I want to be. I want to be someone who moves people, captivates people, tells stories, is honest and real. And so it's paying attention to who those people are, and and also getting training. I've invested in lots of training and coaching to be able to improve my clarity around my topic, my presence on stage. You know, that's those are some of the things that I would say to do is you have to get reps in, you have to get clarity around basically who you're helping and why it matters.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to be willing to do the work. It's a lot of work. It is a you face a ton of
Yeah.
rejection. It's very hard. It's very hard work. You have to be able to put yourself out there. You have to reach out to people, promote yourself. It's not easy to do,
No, it's
but
not
it's really
easy.
but it's rewarding. It's very rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All righty.